I thought I knew who I was. Mia Grace Harris, 32 years old graphic designer living in Seattle. I had my little apartment overlooking Pike Place Market, my morning coffee routine, and Liam, the man I was planning to marry in 6 months. I thought I had it all figured out. Until Tuesday afternoon at Westfield Pharmacy, when everything I believed about my life shattered with 4 simple words from a complete stranger. I was just picking up my prescription, nothing dramatic. The pharmacist handed me the bottle. I turned toward the exit, and that's when I bumped into this older woman. She was maybe in her 50s, carrying way too many shopping bags, and one of them split open right there in the aisle. I bent down to help her collect her things: aspirin bottles, tissues, some greeting cards scattered across the floor, and when I looked up to hand her the last item, she just froze. Her face went completely white, like she'd seen a ghost. She stared at me for what felt like forever, her hands shaking as she reached toward my face. Not touching, just hovering there like she was afraid I might disappear. Then she whispered the words that changed everything. "Oh my God, Olivia," I stepped back, confused. "I'm sorry, I think you have me confused with someone else. My name's Mia." But she wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on mine, tears streaming down her cheeks now. "Olivia Grace," she said louder this time. "The scar by your left eyebrow, the birthmark on your neck shaped like a crescent moon. I've been looking for you for 25 years. That's when the bottle of pills slipped from my hands and shattered across the pharmacy floor. Because here's the thing nobody talks about in stories like this. When someone calls you by a name that isn't yours, but somehow feels like it could be, your entire world doesn't just shift. It explodes. But let me back up. Let me tell you about the life I thought was mine. That morning started like any other Tuesday. I woke up in my studio apartment on Pine Street, the same place I'd called home for 3 years. 750 square feet of what my mom used to call organized chaos. My drafting table covered in logo sketches for a new coffee shop downtown. My laptop balanced on a stack of design books. The kind of beautiful mess that happens when you love what you do for a living. I design logos mostly for small businesses around Seattle. It's not glamorous work, but there's something satisfying about helping someone else's dream get a face. A visual identity that says, this is who we are, this is what we stand for. Liam was already up making coffee in my tiny kitchen. He had this routine where he'd wake up an hour before me just to have breakfast ready when I stumbled out of bed. 3 years together, and he still did little things like that. "Morning, beautiful," he said, handing me my mug. The same navy blue one I'd used every day since college. He kissed my forehead, then moved down to kiss the small scar by my left eyebrow. It was this habit of his kissing my imperfections like they were something precious. I love this little mark," he whispered against my skin. Then he moved to my neck, pressing his lips against the birthmark shaped like a crescent moon that sat just below my left ear. "And this one too. They make you uniquely you." I should have paid more attention to that moment. The way he said uniquely you like it was some kind of promise. Like he was trying to anchor me to myself before I even knew I needed anchoring. Liam Torres, 33 software engineer at Amazon. The kind of guy who still opened car doors and remembered to water my plants when I forgot. We'd been engaged for 8 months, planning a small wedding for the following spring. Nothing fancy, just our closest friends and family at a little venue in Belltown. He left for work around 8, kissing me goodbye with coffee still on his lips. "Don't forget, you have that doctor's appointment at 2, he called from the hallway. "It's just a prescription pickup," I called back. "Nothing dramatic." If only I'd known how wrong I was. I spent the morning working on a logo for a yoga studio. Clean lines, calming colors, something that would make people feel peaceful, just looking at it. It's funny how you can spend hours perfecting someone else's identity while being completely clueless about your own. Around noon, I realized I was almost out of my medication. Anxiety pills, nothing serious, just something to help with the occasional panic attacks I'd been having since college. I grabbed my purse, locked up the apartment, and headed out into the Seattle drizzle. Westfield Pharmacy was only 6 blocks away. I'd been going there for years. Same pharmacist, same familiar routine. Get in, get out, get back to work. Just another ordinary Tuesday errand in my perfectly ordinary life. Except nothing about my life was ordinary. And I was about to find out just how extraordinary the truth really was. So there I was, standing in the middle of Westfield Pharmacy with pill fragments scattered around my feet, staring at this woman who was looking at me like I'd just risen from the dead. She was still crying, but trying to compose herself, wiping her face with the back of her hand, taking these shaky breaths like she was preparing for something huge. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I know this must seem insane, but you have to understand I've been searching for 25 years. I bent down to pick up the larger pieces of the pill bottle, mostly just to avoid looking at her. "Ma'am, I think you're confused. My name is Mia Harris. I've lived in Seattle my whole life." But even as I said it, something felt wrong, like the words were catching in my throat. She knelt down beside me, helping gather the broken pieces. "Please," she whispered, "just let me explain. My name is Carol Anderson. 25 years ago, my little sister disappeared from our home in Portland. She was 7 years old. I stopped picking up the pills. 7 years old, the same age I was in my earliest memory. Her name was Olivia Grace Anderson," Carol continued. "She had these distinctive features: green eyes with gold flecks, a small scar by her left eyebrow from falling off her bike when she was 5. My hand instinctively went to my scar, the one Liam kissed every morning. "And a birthmark," Carol said, her voice getting stronger now, "shaped like a crescent moon right below her left ear." The pharmacy suddenly felt too small, too warm. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Carol was staring at my neck now, at the exact spot where my birthmark was. "Oh my God," she breathed. "It's really you." "This is crazy," I said, standing up quickly. "This is absolutely crazy. People can have similar features. It doesn't mean anything." But Carol was already reaching into her purse, pulling out her phone. "I carry this with me everywhere," she said, swiping through her photos. Just in case I ever—" She turned the phone toward me and my world tilted sideways. It was a photograph of a little girl, maybe 7 years old, sitting on a swing set. She had light brown hair and pigtails, green eyes that sparkled with mischief, and a gap-toothed smile that was so familiar it made my chest ache. The little girl in the photo had the exact same scar by her left eyebrow, the exact same birthmark on her neck. The little girl in the photo was me. I mean, it looked exactly like me. Down to the way she held her head slightly tilted to the right, the way I still do when I'm thinking. The way her left hand was gripping the swing chain while her right hand waved at the camera. "That was taken 3 days before she disappeared," Carol said softly. "Halloween, in 1998. She was so excited about her costume that year. She wanted to be a princess." I stared at the photo, and suddenly I could taste something. Cotton candy. Could smell something. Cinnamon apples. Could hear something. Carnival music playing in the distance. "I don't understand," I whispered. Carol's hands were shaking as she put her phone away. "The police said she wandered off during a family barbecue. We had relatives visiting from out of state. The yard was full of people. One minute she was playing on the swing set, and the next—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "They searched for months, put her face on milk cartons on missing persons websites. My parents never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, even after the police gave up." I felt like I was going to be sick. The fluorescent lights overhead were too bright. The smell of antiseptic and medications was overwhelming. "This can't be real," I said, backing toward the door. "My parents would have told me. I would remember something." But even as I said it, I was thinking about all the things that had never quite made sense. The way my parents had no photos of me before age 3. The way they'd always been vague about our early years, saying we'd moved around a lot when I was little. The way my mom would get this strange guilty look whenever I asked about my baby pictures. Sometimes children block out traumatic memories, Carol said gently, especially if they were very young. I was at the pharmacy door now, my hand on the handle. I have to go. Wait, Carol called out. Please. I know this is overwhelming, but we could do a DNA test, just to be sure. I know people who can do it quickly privately. I turned back to look at her one more time. This woman who claimed to be my sister, who had been searching for me for 25 years. My family is having dinner this Sunday, she said, her voice full of desperate hope. If you change your mind, if you want to know more, here's my number. She pressed a business card into my hand before I could refuse it. Then I was outside, stumbling down the sidewalk, the Seattle rain, mixing with tears I didn't remember, starting to cry. Because deep down in a place I'd been trying not to look, I knew she was right. I knew that little girl in the photograph was me. I made it exactly 3 blocks before I had to stop and throw up in a trash can, outside Pike Place Market. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial Liam's number. When he answered, I could hear the concern in his voice immediately. Mia, what's wrong? You sound like you're crying. Can you come home? I managed to get out between sobs. Please, something happened and I need you here. He didn't ask questions. 20 minutes later, he was walking through my apartment door, pulling me into his arms while I fell apart on my couch. Tell me what happened, he said, gently stroking my hair. So I did. I told him about Carol Anderson, about the photograph, about the way she looked at me like I was a ghost come back to life. I told him about the scar, the birthmark, the little girl who looked exactly like me at 7 years old. Liam listened without interrupting, but I could feel the tension building in his body as I talked. Mia, he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. This sounds like someone who's desperate to find their missing sister. Sometimes people see what they want to see. But the photograph, Liam, it looked exactly like me. A lot of kids look similar at that age. And you said she was emotional crying. Maybe she wasn't thinking clearly. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. But I kept thinking about that little girl on the swing set, the way she held her head, the way she gripped the chain. What if it's true? I whispered. What if I'm not who I think I am? Liam was quiet for a long moment. Then he took my face in his hands, looking directly into my eyes. You are Mia Grace Harris, he said firmly. You're the woman I fell in love with. You're the woman I'm going to marry. Whatever this is, whatever this woman thinks she knows, it doesn't change who you are to me. But as comforting as his words were, they couldn't quiet the questions that were starting to multiply in my head like cancer cells. After Liam went back to work, promising to come home early, I sat at my kitchen table staring at Carol Anderson's business card. It was simple, professional. Carol Anderson, Marketing Director, Portland Children's Hospital. Before I could talk myself out of it, I opened my laptop and typed her name into Facebook. Her profile popped up immediately. The photo showed a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and graying brown hair. She was smiling, but there was something sad around the edges, like she was trying too hard to look happy. I scrolled through her recent posts. Photos of her garden articles about missing children awareness fundraisers for search and rescue organizations. And then I saw it. An album titled Never Forgotten. My finger hovered over the link for what felt like forever. This was it. This was the moment where I could either close the laptop and pretend this never happened, or open Pandora's box and see what was inside. I clicked. The album was full of photographs of the same little girl from the pharmacy. Sometimes she was alone, sometimes with what looked like family members. There were birthday parties, Christmas mornings, days at the beach. But it was the last photo in the album that made my blood turn to ice water. It was the same swing set photo Carol had shown me, but this one was bigger, clearer. I could see more details. The little girl was wearing a yellow sundress with tiny flowers on it. She had a Band-Aid on her knee. She was holding something in her left hand. A small, stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. And suddenly, like a door opening in my mind, I remembered that rabbit. I remembered the way its fur felt against my cheek when I was scared. I remembered how I used to whisper secrets to it before bed. I remembered calling it Bunny. The memory hit me so hard I actually gasped out loud. It was like being underwater for 25 years and suddenly breaking the surface. There were more memories now rushing back in fragments. The taste of my grandmother's chocolate chip cookies, the sound of my dad's laugh, the way the light looked coming through the kitchen window on Sunday mornings. A different kitchen, a different house, a different life. With shaking hands, I clicked on Carol's profile and typed a message. "This is Mia Harris. We met at the pharmacy today. I think we need to talk." I stared at the message for 10 minutes before hitting send. The moment I did, I felt like I was jumping off a cliff with no idea where I was going to land, because deep down I was starting to realize that Mia Grace Harris might not be my real name. And if that was true, then who the hell was I? Carol responded to my message within an hour. She wanted to meet the next day at a small coffee shop in Capitol Hill called Grind Coffee. Somewhere quiet where we could talk without interruption. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that little girl on the swing set. I heard fragments of voices I couldn't quite place, smelled scents that felt familiar but impossible to identify. Liam held me while I tossed and turned, but I could feel his worry radiating through the darkness. He kept asking if I was sure I wanted to do this, if I was sure I was ready to hear whatever Carol had to tell me. The truth was, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I got to Grind Coffee 15 minutes early, ordering a latte I was too nervous to drink. When Carol walked in, she looked different from the day before. More composed, but also more fragile, like she'd been holding her breath for 24 hours. She was carrying a large tote bag that seemed heavy with whatever was inside. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I know this must be overwhelming." "That's one word for it," I said, trying to smile. Carol opened her tote bag carefully like she was handling something precious. "I brought everything I have," she said. "Everything the police gave us back after they closed the case. Everything I've kept all these years." The first thing she pulled out was a manila folder thick with papers. Police reports, I realized. Missing person files. Witness statements from that day in 1998. "This is the original police report," she said, opening the folder. "Halloween weekend, 1998. Olivia Grace Anderson, age 7, disappeared from a family barbecue at my parents' house in Portland." She slid a photocopied page across to me. There was a small black and white photo, paper-clipped to the corner. The same little girl from the Facebook album, but this time it was clearly an official document. Height 3 feet 2 inches, weight 45 pounds. Distinctive marking, small scar above left eyebrow, crescent-shaped birthmark below left ear. My hand went automatically to my neck to the birthmark that Liam kissed every morning. "There were 37 people at that barbecue," Carol continued. "Relatives from 3 different states. The police interviewed everyone multiple times. No one saw anything suspicious. One minute she was playing in the backyard, and the next, she couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Next, she pulled out a stack of photographs. Not just the swing set photo, but dozens of others. Olivia as a baby taking her first steps. Olivia blowing out candles on birthday cakes. Olivia building sandcastles at the beach. And in every single photo, I saw myself. Not just a resemblance, not just similar features. I saw my own expressions, my own mannerisms, my own way of holding my body. It was like looking at a photo album of a childhood I couldn't remember having. "She loved to draw," Carol said softly, pulling out a folder of children's artwork. "She wanted to be an artist when she grew up." I stared at the crayon drawings of houses and flowers and stick figure families. The style was unmistakably mine. I'd drawn the exact same way as a child, the same swirling clouds, the same way of drawing faces with big round eyes. "This is impossible," I whispered. "I know, it seems that way," Carol said. "But look at this." She reached into the bag one more time and pulled out something that made my heart stop completely. It was a small stuffed rabbit gray with age, with one ear missing and a small tear in its side that had been carefully sewn back together. Bunny. The moment I saw it, everything came flooding back. Not just the memory of having it, but the memory of losing it. The panic when I couldn't find it one night. The way I'd cried until my mother, my real mother, helped me look for it under the bed. She carried this everywhere, Carol said, her voice thick with emotion. She called it Bunny. She'd had it since she was 2 years old. I reached out with trembling fingers to touch the soft, worn fur. The moment I did, I was 7 years old again, whispering secrets to this little rabbit in a bedroom I could suddenly see clearly. Pink walls, a window that looked out over a garden, a music box that played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I remember, I whispered and started to cry. Carol reached across the table and took my other hand. I've carried Bunny with me every day for 25 years, she said. Just in case I found you. We sat there crying together, two women who might be sisters, connected by a stuffed rabbit and 25 years of questions. Finally, Carol reached into her bag one last time and pulled out a small box. I know this is a lot, she said, but I brought a DNA test kit. We can do it right here, right now. Send it to a private lab. We'll have results in 3 days. I stared at the box. Such a small thing to hold such enormous consequences. If we do this, I said slowly, and it's positive, what happens then? Carol smiled through her tears. Then I get my sister back, and you get to know who you really are. I thought about Liam, about my parents, about the life I'd built as Mia Grace Harris. But I also thought about that little girl on the swing set, about the memories that were starting to surface, like bubbles rising to the surface of a deep lake. Okay, I said, reaching for the DNA kit. Let's find out the truth. Because as terrifying as the truth might be, living with the questions was somehow worse. I walked home from that coffee shop in a complete daze, clutching the DNA test kit in my purse like it was a bomb that might go off at any moment. When I got back to my apartment, I went straight to my bedroom closet and pulled out the photo albums my parents had given me over the years. I'd looked through them hundreds of times, but now I was looking with different eyes. I spread them across my bed chronologically, starting with what should have been my earliest years. The first photo of me was dated March 2001. I appeared to be about 3 years old, maybe a little older, standing in front of a small house I didn't recognize, holding the hands of the people I'd always called Mom and Dad. But here's what hit me like a physical blow. I looked confused in that photo. Not happy, not excited to be somewhere new. Confused, like I didn't understand where I was or why I was there. Every photo before that date was missing. I flipped through album after album looking for baby pictures, first steps, first birthdays. Nothing. According to these photo albums, Mia Grace Harris hadn't existed before age 3. When my parents had always told me that all our earlier photos were lost in a house fire, my hands were shaking as I picked up my phone to call them. They still lived in Spokane, about 4 hours east of Seattle. Susan and Michael Harris, the people who'd raised me, loved me, given me everything I thought I needed. Mia, sweetheart, my mom answered on the second ring. This is a nice surprise. How are you doing? I'm okay, Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was just looking through some old photo albums and I had a question. Of course, honey. What is it? I took a deep breath. Can you tell me more about the house fire? The one where we lost all my baby pictures? There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. Oh, that, she said, and I could hear something change in her voice. Well, you know, it was such a long time ago. You were so young. Where did we live then? Before the fire? Another pause. Oh gosh, Mia, I can barely remember. We moved around so much when you were little. Your father's job, you know. But my dad had worked for the same insurance company for 30 years. I'd heard him tell that story dozens of times. Mom, I said carefully, what was our address before we moved to Spokane? Sweetheart, why all these questions? Is everything okay? I could hear the nervousness creeping into her voice now, the same tone she'd used when I was a teenager, and she was trying to avoid answering something she didn't want to discuss. I just, I've been thinking about family history lately. For the wedding planning, Liam's been asking about relatives, and I realized I don't know much about our early years. Well, we can talk about all that when you come and visit next month, she said quickly. Your father and I have been meaning to organize more of those old documents anyway. Can I talk to Dad? He's not here right now, honey. He's at his golf game, but I'll tell him you called. After I hung up, I sat on my bed, surrounded by photo albums that suddenly felt like evidence of a lie I'd been living my entire life. I called my dad's cell phone directly. He answered on the fourth ring, and I could hear voices and laughter in the background. Mia, how's my girl? Hi, Dad. I hope I'm not interrupting your golf game. Never too busy for you, sweetheart. What's going on? I decided to try a different approach. Dad, I was wondering if you could help me with something. I'm trying to remember the name of that street we lived on before Spokane. The house that burned down. The background noise seemed to get quieter, like he'd stepped away from his friends. Mia, that's a very specific question. Is there a reason you're asking? I'm just curious about our family history. Honey, you know that was a difficult time for our family. We don't really like to dwell on those memories. But surely you remember the street name, or the city. It was. He paused, and I could practically hear him thinking. It was Maple Street, in Tacoma. Maple Street in Tacoma, I repeated, writing it down. What was the house number? Mia, why does this matter that house is long gone? I know, humor me, Dad. I honestly don't remember the exact number. It was over 20 years ago. But here's the thing, my dad remembered everything. He could tell you the exact score of every Seahawks game from 1995. He could recite the addresses of every house he'd ever lived in going back to his childhood. He was the kind of man who kept detailed records of everything. And he couldn't remember the address of the house where his daughter had supposedly lived for the first 3 years of her life. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment, feeling the foundation of my entire life cracking beneath me. Then, I took out the DNA test kit Carol had given me. I followed the instructions, carefully swabbing the inside of my cheek, sealing the sample in the provided container. My hands were steady, now calmer than they'd been all day, because I'd made a decision. I was going to find out who I really was, even if it meant discovering that the people I'd trusted most in the world had been lying to me for 25 years. I packaged up the test kit and walked it to the nearest FedEx drop box, sending it off to a lab that would either confirm my identity or shatter it completely. As I watched the package disappear into the collection box, I realized I wasn't just mailing away a DNA sample. I was mailing away the last shreds of my certainty about who Mia Grace Harris really was. When Liam came home that night, he found me sitting on the kitchen floor surrounded by scattered photo albums and empty wine glasses. Mia, he dropped his laptop bag and knelt beside me. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have, I said, my voice hoarse from crying. Maybe I am one. I told him about the phone calls to my parents, about their vague answers and convenient memory lapses. I told him about the missing baby pictures, about the house fire that probably never happened, about the address my father couldn't remember. Liam listened without interrupting, but I could see something changing in his eyes as I talked. A kind of protective shuddering, like he was preparing himself for impact. So you sent the DNA test, he said when I finished. It wasn't a question. I had to. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photo albums spread around us. Then he picked up one of the pictures, the one of me at 3 years old, looking confused and lost. You know what scares me most about this, he said softly. What? I fell in love with Mia Grace Harris. I proposed to Mia Grace Harris. I've been planning to spend my life with Mia Grace Harris. He looked up at me and there were tears in his eyes. If you're Olivia Anderson, who am I to you? The question hit me like a punch to the chest because I'd been wondering the same thing. If my entire identity was built on a lie, what did that mean for us, for our relationship, for the future we'd planned together? I'm still me, I said. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was true. Are you? Liam asked, because the woman I fell in love with had parents named Susan and Michael Harris. She grew up in Spokane. She had childhood memories and family stories and a history that made sense. Those people still raised me. Those memories still happened. But they're not real, are they? Not if you're really someone else? I wanted to argue with him, but how could I? If the DNA test came back positive, if I really was Olivia Grace Anderson, then everything I thought I knew about myself was fiction. I don't know who I am anymore, I whispered. Liam reached out and touched my face, his thumb tracing the scar by my eyebrow. The same scar he'd kissed every morning for 3 years. I love this scar, he said. I love the story you told me about how you got it falling off your bike when you were learning to ride. But that's not your story, is it? That's her story. It's Olivia's story. I started crying again because he was right. The story I'd always told about my scar, about falling off my bike in our driveway in Spokane, felt like a borrowed memory now. Someone else's life that I'd been living without knowing it. I need some time, Liam said, standing up. I need to think about this. What does that mean? It means I'm going to stay at my brother's place for a few days. Just until we get the test results back. Just until we know what we're dealing with. Liam, please, don't do this. I need you right now. He stopped at the door and turned back to me. The thing is, Mia, I don't even know if that's your real name anymore. And if it's not, I don't know who I'm supposed to be there for. After he left, I sat alone in my apartment that suddenly felt like a stage set. Everything around me, all the little details of my life, felt borrowed and temporary, like I was an actress who'd been playing a role for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't real. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Mia's friends, Mia's coworkers, Mia's life. But who was I calling if I wasn't Mia? The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I went through the motions of being myself, showing up to work, eating meals, sleeping in my bed. But I felt like I was watching someone else live my life. Every time my phone rang, I thought it might be the lab with the results. Every time it wasn't, I felt a mixture of relief and disappointment that was becoming familiar. Liam texted me twice, once to ask if I was okay, once to say he was thinking about me, but he didn't come home. On the third morning, I woke up to an email notification on my phone. The subject line read, DNA test results, confidential. I stared at the email for 20 minutes before I had the courage to open it, because I knew that once I read those results, there would be no going back. Either I would still be Mia Grace Harris, the woman who'd built a life in Seattle with a man who loved her scars and imperfections, or I would be Olivia Grace Anderson, a missing child who'd been found 25 years too late. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. I opened the email with shaking fingers, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The results were clinical, straightforward, devastating in their simplicity. DNA analysis results, 99.9% probability of sibling relationship between sample A and sample B. 99.9%. The number stared back at me from my phone screen like a verdict, like a death sentence for the life I thought I'd been living. I was Olivia Grace Anderson. I wasn't Mia Grace Harris. I never had been. The phone slipped from my hands and clattered onto the bathroom floor where I'd somehow ended up sitting. I don't remember walking there, don't remember sliding down the wall until I was curled up on the cold tiles. But that's where I found myself sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe, mourning the death of a person who had never really existed. Everything was a lie. My name, my childhood, my family, my entire sense of self. The woman I'd been for 32 years was nothing more than an elaborate fiction, a story someone else had written and convinced me was my own. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. But eventually, I picked up my phone and called Carol. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting by the phone for 3 days. Mia, the results came back. I said, my voice raw from crying. 99.9%. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard her start to cry. I knew it, she whispered. From the moment I saw you in that pharmacy, I knew it was you. But seeing it in writing, can you meet me? I asked. I don't want to be alone right now. Of course, we're the same coffee shop. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I hung up and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The face staring back at me was the same one I'd seen every morning for 32 years. But now it belonged to someone else. Someone named Olivia, who had a sister named Carol, and parents who had never stopped looking for her. When I got to grind coffee, Carol was already there, sitting in the same booth we'd occupied 3 days earlier. But this time, she looked different. Lighter somehow. Like a weight she'd been carrying for 25 years had finally been lifted. I slid into the seat across from her, and we just looked at each other for a moment. Two sisters who'd been separated by time and circumstance, and other people's choices. I have something for you, Carol said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small velvet jewelry box, the kind that might hold a ring or a necklace. This was yours, she said, sliding it across the table. You were wearing it the day you disappeared. I opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a small silver necklace with a heart-shaped locket, the kind of jewelry a 7-year-old might treasure above all her other possessions. You refused to take it off, Carol said, smiling through her tears. Even for baths. Mom had to sneak it off you while you were sleeping to clean it. I lifted the locket out of the box. It was tarnished with age, but when I opened it, I could see 2 tiny photos inside, a man and woman I didn't recognize, but whose faces felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Our parents, Carol said. Mom and Dad. They're both gone now, but they never stopped believing we'd find you. I stared at the photos, waiting for recognition to hit. But it didn't come. These people were strangers to me, even though their DNA ran through my veins. I don't remember them, I said quietly. That's okay, Carol said. You were so young, but they remembered you every single day. I fastened the necklace around my neck, and suddenly I was crying again. Not just for the parents I'd lost and couldn't remember, but for the life I'd been stolen from. For the birthdays and Christmases and ordinary Tuesday afternoons that had been taken away from me. I'm so sorry, I said. I'm so sorry you had to go through all of this. I'm sorry I couldn't remember. I'm sorry I didn't come looking for you. Carol reached across the table and took my hands in hers. Don't you dare apologize, she said firmly. You were a child. You were taken from us. None of this was your fault. But I feel like I should remember something. I feel like I should have known. You were 7 years old and someone erased your entire life. The fact that you survived, that you grew up to be this incredible woman, that's not something to apologize for. That's something to celebrate. We sat there holding hands across the coffee shop table, and for the first time in 3 days, I felt like I could breathe again. I want to know everything, I said. I want to know about our parents, about our family, about the life I had before. I want to know who Olivia Grace Anderson was supposed to be. Carol smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her since this all began. I have 25 years of stories to tell you, she said, and we have the rest of our lives for me to tell them. That's when it hit me. The full weight of what this meant. I had a sister, I had a family, I had a history that went deeper than the lies I'd been living. I'm your sister, I said, testing the words out loud. You're my sister, Carol confirmed, squeezing my hands tighter. And for the first time since this nightmare began, that felt like something worth celebrating. The drive to Spokane felt like the longest 4 hours of my life. Carol had offered to come with me, but I knew this was something I had to do alone. The people who had raised me, who had loved me, who had also lied to me for 25 years, deserved to hear the truth from me directly. I'd called ahead, told them I was coming for a visit. My mom had been so excited talking about making my favorite dinner, asking if Liam was coming too. The guilt was eating me alive, but I needed to see their faces when I told them what I knew. When I pulled into their driveway, everything looked exactly the same as it had my entire life. The same white house with blue shutters, the same garden where my mom grew tomatoes every summer, the same porch swing where my dad would sit and read the newspaper on Sunday mornings. It was hard to believe that this place, which had felt like home for so long, was built on a foundation of lies. My parents were waiting for me at the front door, just like they always did. Mom rushed out to hug me, fussing over how thin I looked, how tired I seemed. Dad hung back, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "Sweetheart, you sounded so strange on the phone," Mom said, ushering me into the living room. "Is everything okay? Where's Liam?" I sat down on the couch where I'd spent countless hours as a child watching cartoons and doing homework. The same couch where they'd taught me to tie my shoes and helped me practice spelling words. "We need to talk," I said, pulling out my phone, "about something that happened this week." I showed them the DNA test results first, watched their faces change as they read the words, watched my mother's skin go pale and my father's hands start to shake. "I know who I really am," I said quietly. "I know my real name is Olivia Grace Anderson. I know I went missing from Portland in 1998. And I know you've been lying to me about it my entire life." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents looked at each other, having some kind of wordless conversation that lasted forever. Finally, my father spoke. "How did you find out? Does it matter?" I asked. "What matters is that it's true. All of it. I'm not your daughter. I never was." My mother started crying, then the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from her soul. "You are our daughter," she said through her tears. "In every way that matters, you are our daughter. But not biologically, not legally, not truthfully." My father sat down heavily in his recliner, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. "We never meant for it to go this far," he said. "We never meant for it to become this." "Then tell me what you meant," I said. "Tell me how a 7-year-old girl ends up with strangers 400 miles away from her real family." My parents looked at each other again, and I could see them making a decision. The decision to finally tell the truth. "It was your father's cousin," my mother said finally. "Eddie Harris. He lived in Portland back then, did odd jobs, some of them not entirely legal. He came to us in November of 1998, my father continued. He had this little girl with him, said her parents had died in a car accident, that she had no other family, that she needed a home." "You believed him?" "We wanted to believe him," my mother said. "We'd been trying to have children for 15 years. We'd been turned down for adoption twice. We were told we were too old, that we'd never be parents. And then Eddie shows up with a beautiful little girl who needed a family," my father said. "He said the paperwork was complicated, that it would take time to make it official. He said we should move away, start fresh, give you a new name, so you could have a clean slate." I felt sick. "You knew it was illegal." "We suspected," my mother admitted. "But we told ourselves it was for the best. You were so quiet, so withdrawn. You had nightmares every night. You kept asking for your mommy and daddy, but Eddie said that was normal, that you'd adjust. After a few months, we couldn't imagine giving you back," my father said. "You were ours. You called us mom and dad. You seemed happy. So you just decided to keep me, to steal someone else's child and pretend she was yours." "We were desperate," my mother said, reaching for my hands. I pulled away. "We loved you so much. We gave you everything we could. We tried to be good parents." "You were good parents," I said, and I meant it. "But you were also kidnappers?" The word hung in the air like a physical thing. My father flinched, like I'd slapped him. "We know," he said quietly. "We've known for 25 years what we did. We've lived with the guilt every single day." "What happened to Eddie?" "He died in a car accident in 2003, my mother said. "He never told us the truth about where you came from. We tried to find out, but he'd covered his tracks too well." "So you just decided to never tell me. What were we supposed to do?" my father asked, his voice breaking. When you were 10, 15, 25, at what point do you tell a child that everything they believe about their life is a lie? I understood their dilemma, but I couldn't forgive it. Not yet. I had a family, I said. I had parents who loved me, who spent 25 years looking for me. I had a sister who never stopped hoping I'd come home. We know, my mother whispered. We know, and we're sorry. We're so, so sorry. The police were surprisingly understanding when I called them. They said cases like this were more common than people realized, and that since I'd been well cared for since my adoptive parents had genuinely believed they were helping me, the charges would likely be minimal. My parents pled guilty to unlawful adoption and received 2 years probation. They had to pay restitution to Carol's family and perform community service. But the legal consequences were nothing compared to the emotional ones. Because the people who had raised me, who had loved me unconditionally for 25 years, were also the people who had stolen me from my real family. And I had no idea how to reconcile those two truths. 2 weeks later, Carol invited me to a family barbecue. The irony wasn't lost on me. I disappeared from a family barbecue 25 years ago, and now I was being welcomed back to one. There's someone I want you to meet, Carol had said over the phone. Actually, several someones. When I pulled up to the house in Portland, I could hear laughter and music coming from the backyard, the smell of grilling burgers and the sound of children playing. It was so normal, so ordinary, and yet it felt like stepping into a different universe. Carol met me at the front door, beaming. Ready to meet the rest of your family. She led me through the house and out to the backyard, where about 20 people were gathered around picnic tables and a large grill. The moment I stepped outside, the conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at me. Everyone, Carol said, her voice thick with emotion. I'd like you to meet my sister Olivia. The silence that followed was profound, and then one by one they started to cry. A woman who looked like an older version of Carol rushed toward me. I'm Emma, she said, pulling me into a fierce hug. I'm your other sister. Oh my God, look at you. You're so beautiful. Emma was 38, 5 years older than me, and had 2 children of her own, 8-year-old Jake and 6-year-old Lily, who hung back shyly until their mother coaxed them forward. These are your cousins, Emma told them. This is Aunt Olivia, the one we've been telling you about. Little Lily stepped forward and handed me a crayon drawing. I made this for you, she said solemnly. It's a picture of our family. Mommy said you've been lost, but now you're found. I looked down at the drawing. Stick figures holding hands under a rainbow with "Welcome home, Aunt Olivia" written in purple crayon across the top. I started crying right there in the middle of the backyard. The next few hours were a blur of introductions. Aunts and uncles and cousins, all of whom had been looking for me in their own ways. They showed me photos of the search efforts, told me stories about my parents, shared memories of the little girl I used to be. You love to paint, Emma told me, showing me a photo album. You were always covered in paint. Mom used to say you were going to be a famous artist someday. I thought about my career as a graphic designer, about how I'd always been drawn to visual arts. I guess she wasn't wrong, I said. As the evening wound down, Carol approached me with a familiar gray bundle in her hands. I think it's time this came home, she said, holding out Bunny. The moment I took the stuffed rabbit in my hands, it was like a dam burst in my mind. Memories came flooding back. Not all of them, but enough. I remembered the pink bedroom with the music box. I remembered helping my mom bake cookies. I remembered the way my dad used to read me bedtime stories. I remembered feeling safe and loved and completely secure in who I was. I remember, I whispered, clutching Bunny to my chest. I remember being happy. Carol hugged me tight. You were the happiest little girl. You brought so much joy to our family. As I was getting ready to leave, my phone rang. It was Liam. Mia, his voice was tentative. I mean, I don't know what to call you anymore. I don't either, I admitted, but I'd like to figure it out. Together. Can I come over? I've been thinking about what you said about still being you, and I think I've been an idiot. An hour later, I was back in my Seattle apartment, and Liam was standing in my doorway, holding a bouquet of flowers and looking nervous. I'm sorry, he said before I could speak. I'm sorry I left when you needed me most. I'm sorry I made this about me instead of about you. Liam, let me finish. I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about who you are, and here's what I know. You're kind. You're creative. You're stubborn when you believe in something. You make the best coffee in Seattle. You cry at dog videos. You're terrible at parallel parking, but you try anyway. I started to smile despite myself. You have a scar by your eyebrow from a bike accident when you were 7. You have a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. You're the woman I fell in love with 3 years ago, and you're the woman I want to marry. He got down on one knee right there in my living room, pulling out the engagement ring I'd given back to him 2 weeks earlier. Will you marry me? He asked. Olivia, or Mia, or whoever you decide to be? I want all of you. I want your past, and your present, and your future. I want the memories you have and the ones you're still discovering. I looked down at this man who had seen me at my most broken and decided to love me anyway, who had watched me discover that my entire identity was built on lies and decided I was worth staying for. Yes, I said, letting him slide the ring back onto my finger. But I have one condition. Anything. I want to be married as both. Olivia Mia Anderson Harris. I want to honor both the girl I was and the woman I became. Liam stood up and kissed me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Because here's what I learned from all of this: identity isn't just about the name on your birth certificate or the family you're born into. It's about the choices you make, the people you love, and the person you decide to become. I was Olivia Grace Anderson, the little girl who disappeared from a family barbecue in 1998. I was also Mia Grace Harris, the woman who built a life in Seattle and fell in love with a man who kisses her scars. And somehow I was both, and somehow that was enough. The wedding is next spring. Both my families will be there. Sometimes the most shocking discoveries come from the most ordinary moments. A chance encounter at a pharmacy, a stranger who sees something familiar in your face, a DNA test that changes everything you thought you knew about yourself. What would you do if someone called you by a name that wasn't yours, but somehow felt like it could be? Have you ever questioned your own identity or wondered about missing pieces of your past? If this story moved, you hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you never miss our latest true stories. Share this with someone who believes that family isn't just about blood. It's about love, acceptance, and the courage to face the truth, no matter how complicated it might be. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.